For those of you who are watching here, I'm Alex Lindsay. Now, I am on one side of the world. On the other side of the world is the Africa Digital Media Academy. So let's cut to them. Hey guys, can you wave to everybody? Those are our guys in Kigali, Rwanda. And we do these classes fairly often. And so this is, and we just finished actually another class reviewing some of the green screen work that our students in Rwanda have, we're producing. So we'll be having a discussion with the students. I'm going to kind of walk through stuff, the basics of green screen, of shooting, and take any questions. They've already been doing a ton of green screen. I've talked to them about it before. So this will be kind of a refresher course for them. But for anybody who's actually watching, if you're watching this live, the thing to know is that you can just ask questions. This is your opportunity both for the class as well as for our online audience. We're kind of experimenting with the idea of including more people than just a classroom and a teacher. So what we're going to talk about is green screen, of course. And now this is our studio in, let's go to the wide shot here. And this is our studio here in Petaluma, California. Can we make that shot any wider? There you go. So what you have back here, and you can follow me around, or I'll come over here. So what you have here is a green screen. Now this is a green screen cyc. So this curves down, and it actually comes out probably to right about out in this front area here. So this lets us do full top to body. Now we're not doing that right now. One of the things that we do, sorry. One of the things that we do is we cover it up most of the time. That way we're rolling things over it, moving things around, and we're not scuffing up our green screen that we spend a lot of money painting. So, so we try to do the best we can not to scuff it up. These are really good. These are just exercise mats. They're really thick and heavy ones so that you don't slip on them. And they kind of keep everything below kind of protected. So that's one of the things that we work on. Now, a couple other things as we start to look at how we have this set up. We have two, right now we're lighting this with two 4x4s. These are Kino 4x4s. So you can see over here, these are the, these got 4 foot Kinos, and there's 4 of them on. And so that is how we light them. Now, a lot of times you see things lit from the top, and most of the time you need to light them on the top. But the one thing I will say is our experience has mostly been, especially for interviews. Now, there's a lot of different things that you can do, but especially for interviews here, it is oftentimes you get a cleaner green screen in the background if you go from the side. So it's just something to consider. It's just easier to get a nice, clean background. You tend to almost always get a gradient if you go from the top to the bottom. So it's something, and sometimes necessity requires it, but it's something to think about. Now, another thing to think about as we put this together is that a couple things here is that you'll notice that we're lighting the background back here separately from the foreground up here. So this is not what we don't want to do is try to light everything with the same lights, because then if we want to change the exposure, so if I decide I want to change the exposure here, and if you look at our, if we look through the camera tap, if I start changing the exposure here, you'll notice that it doesn't have any effect on our background. And that's because we've created a nice, you can go ahead and back to me. That's because we've created a nice separation. And if we look at it, I think we're looking at it from above, you can see here that we've got a solid 3 or 4 meters of separation between the foreground and the background. So any time that you can actually make that work, it's very effective. So that's, those are kind of some of the things to kind of consider as we start to light this up. Now, the other thing that's going on here, and it'll be very hard, I won't turn this around because it'll be difficult for you to see it, is that we have green bulbs in here. So KinoFlow does make green bulbs. They don't usually promote them that much, but they have green bulbs. You can see I look kind of green in front of these lights. So you can actually buy the bulbs and put them into your standard. You can get ballasts, just regular things at Walmart or at Costco, and then put green bulbs in them, and it'll make it much better as far as green screen goes. So that's kind of a cheap way to go. The bulbs cost $25 each, but the ballasts oftentimes cost like 10. So it's just something to kind of consider when you're thinking of building your own. The KinoFlows obviously are more expensive, but they don't flicker and they last a lot longer. You'll notice that we have a big flag here. So this flag, this is just foam core that's black. And this is just to make absolutely sure that none of the green hits our subject. So that's one of the things that we're trying to avoid in that setup. So, and again, if you're watching this live and you have any questions, just let us know. You can go ahead and post them onto the question system, and then we'll go from there. So another thing that we will tend to do as we go through this here. Now, what you're looking at here is conduit, and conduit is something that we have been using for quite some time. This gives us kind of a control of our input here. Inside of that, we have the effects. And one of the first things we're going to do is take the input, and we're going to go ahead and look at it. So we just want to make sure that we know, how it looks in the preview and the scopes. And so here is our preview of the subject here. Now, there's a couple things. You'll look at the scopes here, and we'll look at the Rgb Parade. Now, there is the Rgb Parade is something we spend a lot of time in as we work through this. And so one of the things that we want to look at here is, now, don't worry too much about this here. You can see my hand going in. Now, all this is, of course, is our levels in red, green, and blue. We have a question coming in, I think. This is from Dan Burt in the UK. He said, you have painted green wall and floor, recommendations for small home and fabric green screens or similar. Good question. So if you're doing it at home, one of the things you can do is just paint a wall. So we had an office for a long time that all we did was paint a wall. So we just painted one big wall green. We didn't have the cyc. The cyc is obviously a big expense. If you're not going to shoot below the knees, you don't need the cyc. So you can really get away with a lot with just a regular background if you're not shooting below the knees. For a lot of interviews and stand-ups and even some effect shots, you can get away without any kind of cyc. So you can just paint a wall green. Now, we use composite components green, and we're pretty specific about it. But that's our preference. Roscoe green works okay. It's a little bluer or a little something that we don't like as much, but it's not bad. But anyway, so we have, but we use composite components green. They also make a lycra that we have a bunch of, which is you can just stretch it out. There's a lot of 12-foot frames or 4-meter frames that you can buy on Amazon that work really well. Cowboy Studios makes one, and they all come, and they just come in bags, and you can just stretch out a nice a green screen over top of that as well, and then that's really easy to put up and stretch out. And then with a lycra screen, if you just spritz it, and we have lots of spritzers around, but if you spritz it, you'll actually and leave it for a couple hours, it'll dry out and all the wrinkles will be gone. So that's a little helpful thing if you're out on the road. Next question here is from Magic Mud in Kenya. Hey, Pete. Peter Mute is Magic Mud, I believe, and he's probably one of the more talented animators in Africa, in my opinion. So, any specific rules on when to use blue or green screen backgrounds? Okay, that's a good question. So, the rule. The rule generally is the only time that I would use a blue background is if someone had a green, very green, something in the foreground. So if you key this, if you have this really well, so if this is done well in the back here, you will. Here, we can go over here. So, and I don't know if we have anything that's kind of green back here, but one of the things that to know is by having a really solid green lit with green, you can actually take foliage and actually key it on green. So it's just that you can't have something super green. So if someone has a super green logo, that's typically the problem. We end up with high schools that have really green logos of Trojans or like these soldiers that are all in green, or they're Irishmen or something like that, and they're really green. Those are things that don't key well in green. But outside of that, we tend to want to use green over blue. Blue, the problem with blue in general is that the blue record is a very low quality. There's a lot of grain. There's all the stuff that you didn't want in the image ended up in the blue channel. So while it is a pure channel, the problem you really get into is that it's just not a very good channel to key, and you end up with lots of little bits and pieces of stuff you don't want to deal with. So the green has the most data in it. So we tend to get a much cleaner image to work with. So So that's the thing that you want to kind of think about. So green is almost always what you want to use. Blue, especially in Africa. So one of the big things is you want luminance. You want a lot of luminance contrast to make everything look better. And so, especially when you're working in Africa, one of the things that's very common is to have that we've seen in other parts of Africa is an underlit blue screen in front of someone with a darker complexion, and that becomes just you're basically rotoscoping at that point. You're not really being able to green screen because there's just not enough detail there. So green especially works well in Africa. And so there's just a lot of luminance contrast there with most subjects there. Where green is a little bit more challenging, where you might want to think about it, is red hair, like kind of strawberry hair, tends to be a little bit harder to key in green just because there's a lot of green in it. Not red, but like that strawberry blonde tends to be a little harder to key, and so sometimes we've gone to blue with that. But those are kind of the rare cases. We've shot a lot of green screen footage, and we haven't shot blue maybe in the last 5 years. so that's kind of my my input there. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and ask them. Again, do we have any other questions before I go further from Rwanda?
Okay. Is it possible that she step a little bit aside so that we can see inside conduit how are the RGB values if we are supposed to go in that range of those values when we are lighting the background, the green screen background?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll Patrick, go ahead and give me. Oh, I'm looking at the preview here. So we're going to jump into conduit here. We're going to go into scopes. So here are the scopes. So here's my image, and here are the scopes here. Now, we're probably not going to talk too much about the Demont chart, which is what you're seeing right here. So a couple things here. One is that this is kind of on the lower end. So if we look at a lot of you will see this is what most people see here, and that is the luma, and that's just the straight overall brightness of all the channels together, summed together. That's not exactly what we want here. What we want is the Rgb Parade, which is each channel separated out. Now, all of this, the thing to know when you're looking at an Rgb Parade or a luma scope is that, so all of this is simply a representation of the brightness of different things in the image. So what you're seeing here, if we cut to the, well, I can cut to it, hold on. If we go, let me turn that off. If we go here, so you can see that there are different details here. So that little checkerboard that you saw here, that is this chart here, this Chroma Demont chart is right here from Cameline. And so that's there, and then here's Brook. And what we can do here is if I switch back here, in the same way, you can see this is what that chart looks like on scopes, and this is what Brook looks like on scopes. It's kind of like the Matrix, after a while you see blonde, brunette. Anyway, so that is what you're looking at. Now this big line that goes around here is your green screen. Now because we're using there's a lot of separation because we're using green bulbs. So normally this blue would be a little bit higher, but what's really fortunate for us is that it's not. so with the green bulbs, the blue is just slammed all the way to the bottom for the actual screen, which is going to make our key a little bit better. And then the red is fairly low, and then the green is at the bottom end of what we'd want. And I'll go over and look here what our exposure and everything else is set to here. I could probably open this up just a little bit. So I'm just going to open this up, and you can see if you jump to the back to conduit, you can see as I open up that exposure, I get that, and I'm still. Now, one of the things I'm looking at from the exposure end of things is you'll see Brook is going to start peaking right there. See that? That's probably her shirt, maybe parts of her face, but you'll see that. So if I open up that exposure, and this is one of the reasons. So what we're seeing here, when I open that exposure up, one of the things that you're going to see here is, see this area, this area, this area, this area, this area, this area. That's now over 100%. So that is peaking in our scopes there, and that's a little bit of a bummer. So, so what we want to do, though, here's the cool thing, is we got our green screen to the brightness that we wanted, but what we can do now is I can bring this exposure down. So looking at the scopes, and you can put, yeah, that's good. That was good. That was a good angle. Looking at the scopes there, you can see how when I bring down her foreground exposure a little bit, so I opened it up, but I'm looking at the data and just making decisions about, now creatively I can make other fine-tuning decisions. Now you notice this one was just the fill, so it didn't really affect a lot of what was there, so we'll leave that where it is. And we'll go back over here and we'll tune this one down just a little bit. And I might let a couple things peek here and there, but you'll notice the big thing here is that what you're going to notice here is that I am getting, in this area I was able to adjust the background very cleanly, and then adjust the foreground exposure very cleanly. Both of them are far enough apart that I'm not actually having them collide, you know, and so that works out really well for us. And so now as I look at it, now oftentimes the person won't necessarily be in the image when you're actually doing this work. And so one of the things that we want to look at here is when we look at this at this screen, so 70% is a pretty good, especially for interviews, is a pretty good number for what you want. Now the thing is that what's great about these is the scopes make this getting this nice flat line, because it's not just that it's at 70%. A lot of times their scopes might look like that, you know, or you know, like this, or they might be really wide, and those are all things we want. The thinner this line is, and the straighter the line is, the less work we're going to have to do. And we're inherently lazy as visual effects artists. We want to be lazy. You know, we want to not do more work than we have to. And so one of the things we want to do is kind of figure that out. So the thing when we look at this, if I go over to this green screen here, so if I look at this light here, and I grab, and Patrick, you're probably going to want to jump back and forth between the. So now look at, as I turn that, or I'll turn it this way, see that? So you'll see me just moving this is affecting, you know, obviously it's affecting our scopes, it's affecting our green screen. To our eye, it may not actually look that bad. And if you were doing simple samples with a color meter, or not a color meter, but a light meter, you might not notice it all. But by doing this, I can simply move these lights until everything's nice and flat. And that makes it infinitely easier to make this work. You know, it's just a lot simpler for us to do that than to you know, to try to figure it all out. So just using the scopes, just using the math, you can get everything close. It's not that you're still going to have to use your eye, especially on your foreground, but you just want to be very math-driven when it comes to actually lighting the background. You shouldn't need to look at the background. All I do is look at the scopes. You know, so all I'm looking at is the scopes here when I'm lighting my green screen, and it shouldn't take you, if you are in roughly the right position, it shouldn't take you more than 10 or 15 minutes to set that up. And then you're going to have a nice clean background. So anyway, so that's the kind of the basics of that lighting process. Any other questions from the class?
I would want to ask if there is any recommendation of crops to bring in a green screen studio, because sometimes when you are keying, you got some problem of the colors.
So what color of clothes do you want to avoid or to use? So in my opinion, the color of clothes that are obviously in front of a green screen, the worst color to key is green. so that's the one we don't want to put in front of a green screen. Red is usually a real, and when I say red, I mean a saturated red. A very, very bright red, a very, very pure red is something that just doesn't look good in video in general. It's not, like the red shirt that you're wearing right now is fine. Like that would key just fine. In fact, that would probably key very well. If you have a really, really red, it tends to, when we compress it for the web and oftentimes for video, you can start to see all kinds of chunkiness and stuff like that. So it tends to be a little bit more difficult to deal with. In general, other things that are difficult to key are the things that you would try to avoid if you could, in a lot of cases, but definitely when you're keying. Pure blacks and pure whites are going to accentuate the sharpening that's being done inside the camera. So the closer, the more neutral colors or more neutral brightnesses that you have on the close, the easier it's going to be for you to key the footage without having to even worry as much about sharpening. Because what happens is sharpening looks for edges of contrast. The sharpening isn't really making anything sharper. So when you add a sharpening function or a detail function to a camera, it's not actually making it sharper. All it's doing is faking it. And what it does to do that is it does an operation that's similar to a high pass, what's called a high pass filter. And what it does is it basically, imagine a blurred image of that, of it. And another case I'll show it. I'm not going to show it today, but we'll talk about sharpening on one of our classes. But what it does is it takes all the edges that have a lot of contrast and it blurs them a little bit. And the white side becomes a little darker where the black edge is, and the black side becomes a little lighter where it's against the white. When it does that, it actually makes it pop. It makes those edges pop out, and so it makes you feel like something sharper. All cameras are out of focus. I mean, that's the other thing to remember, is that all cameras are never perfectly sharp because the pixels on the chip are all next to each other, and so they're not on top of each other, they're on next to. So when it's capturing red, green, and blue, it's capturing them all on separate channels, and so there's never going to be a perfectly sharp thing within the process. And so that moire and everything else that's there is not going to allow you to have a sharp image. So everything has to be sharpened. The camera will do it for you. But if you have really black or really white, it tends to do it a little bit more. Black tends to disappear. White tends to over-peak. So black and whites are things that we try to avoid if we can. Reds, we just don't like on video as much if we can avoid it. Greens are hard to key. Neutral colors are great. So like the yellow shirt right behind you is will key really easily. so those are things that you want to kind of think about there. So very good question. This is from Julian Siri Gude, I believe, or Good, from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. It says, without specialized equipment and software to measure your key before shooting, what should you look for visually that would indicate lots of headaches later? What inexpensive solutions are there for checking your key? So number one is that Conduit, which is what I'm using here, is free. So you can do a search for Pixel Conduit and you'll find it. It doesn't cost you anything to have it. The only thing it costs you is having some way to interface it into a computer. Now other people, what you can do if you don't have any computer to plug it in, and if you're doing any sizable green screen work, if you're not, your time is worth something. So really doing this measurement beforehand and figuring this out and getting it just right saves you hours of time in the back end. It makes a much better product. It's worth the $150 for a mini recorder that will plug in or something that will plug in a signal into your computer, in my opinion. So just keep that in mind. You can also, if you, for whatever reason you don't have that, you can also use zebras. So you can set your zebras at 70%. Or 80%, and just make sure that they look flat. So you just open up the exposure, and if they look flat going all the way across when they're peaking, you know that you have a fairly flat screen. It's not going to be nearly as good as other things, but if you see, you can use that in the camera, the zebras in the camera to do some of the work. But I highly suggest using scopes. And there's a great, Scope Box is another great package that you can get from Divergent, I believe it's Divergent Software. Great package that's pure scopes as well. It's a little bit more expensive than Conduit, but very, very good. And then the next question is also from Julian. It says, what's the minimum distance in separation that you need between the green screen and the subject? So the minimum distance here, and we'll go back. Why don't we do the overhead camera here? So the minimum distance here as we look at this is really, you can see the green spilling out all the way to about here. So we would really say 5 or 6 feet is what we would consider minimum distance. We like to have more than that. So we like to have 3 to 4 meters, 5 meters if we can get it, between the foreground and the background. The more separation you can get, the less spill you're going to have. It's just a much better setup. So the more distance is better. But we would consider. We've done ones where the person is a meter or 3 feet in front, but we wouldn't do that very often if we don't have to. So 1 to 2 meters is probably minimum. Try to get to 3 or 4 meters if you can. I think that would be the next thing. So the next question here is, and this is from RL, and this is coming in from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Fantastic. This is, will the Pixelcorps accept new members anytime soon? I've been waiting to get in for a while. Thanks for this event. Thank you very much. We are going to accept it, and what you're seeing here, both working the classes in Rwanda and the question system that I'm answering right here, all of this is part of us getting ready to do that. So stay tuned. But right now we're mostly focused on Rwanda as we keep on building that up. But it's something to but that's kind of where we're going, is trying to figure this all out. So if you like it, stay tuned, and we'll go from there. So let me pop this off again. All right. So next question here. Chris Penny from Winnipeg. It said, is it practical to try and use a green screen on an outdoor shoot? It's absolutely practical. I mean, you can put a green screen anywhere. The background shoot, the big thing is just trying to get a diffuse lighting. So if you do it outdoor in a very sunny area, you're going to tend to get more gradations. We've definitely done outdoor shoots with green screen, and it's definitely possible. It's just a lot more challenging, and what you end up doing a lot more is more roto. The thing to remember about roto is that in rotoscoping fully is that rotoscoping is used in 80% of every visual effects shot that you see, and possibly more. That's the number that I was given by a pretty prominent visual effects supervisor. And so it's not, you almost rarely, in a visual effects shot, you rarely are going to get a clean image that you're not going to have to clean up in some way, shape, or form. So the green screen at that point, or the blue screen that you might use, and in effects areas you might use blue screen for different things. For instance, explosions and everything else. Some fire does look better on, well, fire looks really good on black, but it looks better on blue oftentimes. Anyway, but you are just using it as a guide. It takes out some of the work with fine detail, but you're still going to end up cleaning up a lot of it. If you're doing interviews, the big thing is just trying to find a diffuse area that you can do that in. Next question here is, this is from Stephen Dainty. Hey, Stephen. In Stoke-on-Trent in UK. For HD delivery, would your preference be for raw HD footage or compressed 4K footage, assuming raw 4K is not available? It depends on what compressed means. I think that would be the big thing, is what do we define as compressed footage and how compressed it is. So if it's JPEG compressed, we'd probably prefer the raw HD. The big advantage of 4K footage, even if it's a little bit compressed, is that the 4K, when you scale it down, you're essentially, especially if you're delivering in HD, when you scale it down, you basically have 4 times as much resolution, and you're essentially oversampling the image. So there's a lot of things that could go wrong with the edges that gets cleaned up as you just kind of mush everything together. So you do the key, you apply it to your 4K background, and then you scale it down, and a lot of times it'll smooth out a lot of things that were problematic before. So it would depend on how compressed it is. If it's too compressed, it'd be a problem. But I would test it. You may find that scale down actually improves the overall piece of the final one. Next question is from this is from Dan Shepard in Paducah, Kentucky. And he said, what is your Telestrator software? The Telestrator software is, this is what he's talking about, guys. So what I was doing here, Telestrator software is, if you cut to this, is me being able to do this. So I'm drawing here, which is kind of, and that's our Telestrator software. And it is, we just created it. So there's no, there is no software. It's a lot of hardware. Well, there's a little bit of software in between and everything else. It's R&D. I wanted to be able to, we were doing classes in Rwanda, and I wanted to be able to do that and talk about things, and I felt a little crippled by not being able to telestrate. So the guys here threw together some hardware to make that happen. We're hoping to make more use of it later, so I'm glad somebody noticed. It was a lot of work. That's all I got to say. So last question that we have sticking out right now, and then we're going to go back to the class, is there any recommendations on light levels, foot candles for talent versus green screen. Yeah, we don't, so basically what we'd say about that, it's a good question. The green screen, you know, it's not, we don't really do foot candles. What we do is really on a scope, because we don't really use film cameras anymore. So we always have a feed coming out of the camera. So for us, a scope on the scopes, for a regular exposure, oftentimes we want the green screen to sit at about 70% in an Rgb Parade. We sometimes will make that lower if they're going to go into a black background. So if they're going to be in a dark background, we might drop it to 30 or 40%. And that might be something that we choose to do so that we don't have as much spill. So that is a time when we might lower that green screen level. And the foreground level is if in effect shot, they should be lit the way they would be lit in the actual shot. In an interview, we just want them to be well exposed. So we want to have the whites be white, you know, be between 90 and 100, and the blacks be black, between 0 and 10. And for a standard interview, but we're not really looking for foot candles, or we just want the back to be exposed well, foreground to be exposed the way we want it to. We would consider the other stuff a little bit old school to worry about that. And now that we have mostly digital cameras, I think we could do that on our own. Got through those questions, and do we have any other questions in the class before I talk a little bit in Conduit? Any other questions about this?
Question here from Levan.
I have one question.
Uh-huh.
Like I saw the setup, someone cannot step on the background, on the green screen, I mean. So how do you manage when you are going to shoot wide shot?
Yes.
Or
very good.
Someone walking?
How do you manage shooting a wide shot? And we'll do an example of that in another class, but I'll talk about it a little bit. So this is the place where we break the rule of the foreground has to be away from the background, because you can't do that. You still want as much of the background to be back there as you can. The big issue is that you know, while we do this here, that we can push that background further back, but it's still going to come under their feet. And you're going to end up lighting it separately. So you're going to have a good lighting on the background here. So if we swing over here, you know, we obviously still want to have a good, high quality back here, and still have lights here. But you're going to have to light this background, and it's going to be a lot more difficult. So one of the things to understand is that you are going to have a lot more challenges with the key. You want to light this in the foreground well. You want to do the best you can to match it. And this is a place where we actually don't use, when we're doing head to toe, we tend not to use the green bulbs, because what happens is that now we want all the bulbs that are lighting the green screen to be the same, and we can't light our foreground with green bulbs. So now we are going to use daylight bulbs or indoor bulbs or whatever we're going to use. So you know, whether it's tungsten or daylight, we're going to use those lights on everything so that the green is as close as possible. You're going to have a lot more range that you have to cover, because it won't be perfect. Typically the ground will either be brighter or darker than the background. You have to be careful about how you light it in the exposure to make sure that you don't lose the shadow detail, or you can fake it. We can talk about that later. But those are other things that you can do there. But typically move away from the green bulbs, you want to move away from the green bulbs, use regular bulbs, try to light it as evenly as you can on the background, and also just know that it's going to be a lot more work. I mean, it literally, shooting head to toe is literally 4 times more work than shooting knees up. So and when you're bidding on it with a client, just take that into account as you're working on that. So good, very, very good question. Other questions from the class?
Yes, I have one. Okay, we have been seeing differences between the green screen, and which one is the best between the light green, the medium, and the dark green screen?
Differences in our green screen or other green screens?
No, the best one to key between the dark and the light green.
Yeah, so the green that I have behind me, this kind of very, very pure green, is the best to key. And if you're doing an interview, most of the time, you know, you want to have that exposure of that green on an Rgb between 60 and 80, which is a pretty bright green. But that's going to give you a lot of separation between everything else. You may end up, if you have a really dark background, may want to use a slightly darker green so that it doesn't create as many edge issues. So that would be the only time you use a darker green. But generally, or if it's going to be a night shot that's there, that might be the only time when you do it. But otherwise, for general purpose green screen, a nice, bright, pure green is the way to go. Good question. Are there
A couple more?
Yep, go ahead.
Another question is it good to shoot with a shallow depth of field on the green screen, or is better to shoot with the highest depth of field?
Good question. So here's the thing about that, is that if you're shooting with you may decide you want the look of a really, really short depth of field, where literally the eyes are in focus and the nose is out of focus, or the eyes are in focus and the ears are out of focus. That's a look that a lot of people like because they started shooting with 5Ds and they do that really easily. That's fine. The challenge with that is that if you're really doing like a training or you're doing an interview and you don't know what's going to go behind them and they might move a little forward or back and they drop in and out of focus, if you don't want that look, if you want them always in focus, it's better to close down just a little bit. So by closing down, you know, what that means, of course, is that I can have, if I don't want to close it all the way down because that becomes hard to light the green screen. One of the things that we want to look at here, if we look through the camera tab, and I turn on my display here. All right, so one of the things that you're going to notice here is that we are set, this is set at -3 dB on this, and this one is set at about 4.5. The f-stop's about 4.5 here. And one of the things that is useful for is it does keep everything largely in focus. If you start closing down more, you're not going to have enough light for the camera. So the problem is then you're going to have to gain up, and you want to be at -3 or 0 for a green screen, because every time you start increasing your gain, you're going to increase all kinds of errata, static, the grain, and so we don't want to have to key that. So at -3 we have the cleanest image we can get, and so the closer we can get to that, the better. Now, if you open it all the way up, you just have mostly the biggest problem is the person leans forward or back and they drop in and out of focus. So a lot of times when we're doing like Mac Break Studio, we're trying to keep it about between 4 and 6 f-stop so that there's about this much area that's in focus. The great thing about shooting in front of a green screen is you can always drop the background out of focus anytime you want. so you can just you can just defocus your background, and so that you can you can shoot the person completely in focus and make the background look nice and soft, and you have control of that later. So you don't have to shoot it too far out of focus. Again, the only time that some people like to do that is when they want it to be a really short depth of focus, and that's more of a creative decision as to whether you want them to go in and out of focus as they lean forward and back. Some people like that in their interviews. But a lot of times you want to try to keep everything in focus and make those decisions later. So that's the thing to consider as far as that goes. Definitely try to keep your gain as open as you can to make that, your gain as low as possible to make that work. Great question. One more question from Rwanda, and then we'll go back to the online folks.
Yes, thank you. When you started, you introduced us about the curve of the green screen. But when I saw it, it's almost the same size with the curve we have in our green screen studio, the curve. So my question is there any requirements of the size of the curve? Because someone may want to, maybe because of the size of the studio, to make the curve like a bit smaller or small. What's the requirement? Is there any question as long as he avoids the line, the sharp angle?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question here is how the slope, how big does that curve need to be, the radius of that curve need to be to make it work? The larger the radius, the better. So you're really in the situation where the bigger the radius is, the softer that curve is going to be, the easier it's going to be to light, the easier it's going to be to work with. The largest curve I've ever seen is, I believe, 2-meter radius. So that's a very, very large, soft curve. That I've only seen that in one studio, and it looks great. But what the problem is a big curve like that takes up a lot of your studio. It takes 5 feet on each side out of your studio, so it makes your studio a lot smaller. The one that I believe that we installed in Rwanda, as well as the one that we have here, is a 3-foot or a 1 meter radius. I believe that's what we put into both studios there. The smallest ones that I've seen are about 0.5 meter. So a 1/2 meter radius is the smallest that I've seen in one. And when you have that smaller one, you're going to see more shadowing in there. It's better than an edge. So the big thing is the curve will definitely be better than an edge and easier to work with. But the smaller it gets, the more shadowing that you're going to end up with, and the harder it's going to be to do a lot of head-to-toe shooting. Now, another little trick that you can do, I don't know if we have anything I can show it with. Hold on one second as I wander off here. Now, you're not going to be able to see this really well, but one of the things to think about here is, see this, if we look at this black, this is just some duvetine, and you look at how this shadows, this looks better than an edge, when it comes to this. So one of the things that we've done is we'll take green fabric, and we take the green fabric and we actually roll it up over a big tube and put it right up against the corner. And that is the really poor man's version of how to create a little cove. and it eases out and makes a much less noticeable curve. So we take whatever's going along the ground, we just run it up and then up and over a tube, and we did that for years before we had a cove. So, so in San Francisco we had a set where we just painted the wall, and we didn't have a lot of head-to-toe shots. But every time we did, we would roll it up and then just roll it up over that and just press it up against the wall, and it definitely made that edge a little bit easier to work with. So, anyway, something to consider there. I'm going to jump back to the online one. Great question. Let me jump back to online, and then we'll come back to you guys. How do you avoid making that cheesy, fake green screen look? Basically, how can you make it look more real in the background? This is from Chris Penny in Winnipeg, Canada. And so it's a good question. So how do you make it not look fake? So there's a couple things beyond the green screen. So obviously what we've talked about so far is how to make a good key where we're getting rid of all of those. We're trying to make nice soft edges where we have all the hair detail and all the little bits and pieces that we want. So that is important. The next step, of course, is how do we make it look like it's part of the scene? So there's a couple things. One is lighting, trying to match the lighting so that the lighting that we use, like right now we're just doing interview lighting, which is just however we're going to make it. But when we look at the background and we have the background inform us, so it is useful, especially if you're really trying to match the background, is to get that background before you have the foreground. And that's one of the reasons that we use Conduit, is because we're able to do a key live and make a decision about that in real time to figure that out. And so, in getting informed by the background is important. Also, other things that make the subject look more like they're part of the background is making sure that the color temperature, so that they don't look too warm or too cool compared to the background. The final thing is perspective, and so if you look at the vanishing points of something in the background, you want to make sure that the vanishing points in the foreground make sense too. And one of the things that we've done in the past is throw a box where the person's going to sit, and we try to match it to the background as far as the focal length and everything else, or a couple little things there to make it look like it's really has the same vanishing points as the background, so that we can make sure that it really looks like it's part of the scene. So perspective, color space, and lighting are probably the three biggest things after a good key that are going to inform the viewer that you're either there or you're not there. Just something to kind of think about. So let me show a couple more things here in Conduit, so we can look at whether our key is actually even working. So let's. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and close this here, and so here's our raw key. Now this is just a straight color difference key, and so one of the things that we let's pull this to 1:1. And one of the things that you're going to see here is that without doing any work, you can already see that we still have some areas here that we can still see hair, we can still see all this stuff. And this is a live key. This is not doing any kind of post work on it, and we're already doing pretty well. Now, what we're going to do is we don't usually, even though the color difference key in this software will do it, we will tend to actually go into the image and we'll change the levels. So let me grab levels here. We'll just drop it in here. This is a nodal compositor, and that's a whole other conversation that we're not going to have today. So let's see here. So now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to invert the image by simply swapping this. Now, it didn't change anything because I'm still looking at that, but here's the swap. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring our black levels in. and you'll see this fine element where if I pull, the harder I push the black levels, the more I'm going to lose her hair. And so there, I may decide that I want to, you know, do some other work to it before and as I bring this up, I'm going to bring some down. The more I push the white up, the more possible edging I'm going to get. So we want to be careful of that as well. And so you just have to decide how far you want to go with this process. And when we talk about the other applications, we'll talk more about that. But what you're going to notice here is that we have a fairly clean screen without a lot of work. And that's because we have a very clean one. Now, the challenge really here is that we still have a little bit of a gradient down here, and of course that's what's showing up, you know, in these areas down here. So that is something for us to kind of think through. So one of the things that the big thing is that we want to, when we think about this, we want to think about the fact that this is the most important part of our key. So this is down here can be a whole other key. Up here can be another key that can be much harder because those are hard lines. So we want to divide and conquer. So when we think about keying, and we're not going to do this today, but we want to think about, number one, from a garbage mat perspective, that's all we care about. We just want to grab this stuff, you know, if there's something in here that's really green, you know, somewhere like a necklace or something like that, we can always build, you know, a core mat, you know, in Roto and make it work. And then we can figure out ways to do some basic garbage matting so that, because the big thing is we want to spend all of our time thinking about the hair. You know, so that's that is the big thing is all the little details here. The hair is what's really going to sell our key, especially on an interview. So figuring out ways that we can get rid of all this stuff and make it just handle it is the way to do it, so that all of our focus is on little bits of hair and little imperfections there. That is what's going to sell your key, and so that's the thing that you want to think about as you start to work on that. And we're almost to the end here of talking about the setup. The next time we do this, what we're going to do is we're going to go through applications, and we're actually going to key stuff. So we're going to, you know, today was really about just setting up the green screen, thinking about that process. So anyway, so let's see what the next question here is from RL in Rio de Janeiro. It said, let's see, let's answer this. It says, what is your opinion on adding lighting to the keyed image, inner glows, and so on? I think I'm assuming that what you're talking about really is light wrap, and that is definitely something we add. We'll talk about that in the next time we have this conversation. But light wrap is something, you know, so adding little inner glows to the light wrap, you should be very sensitive to it. A lot of people overdo that, even in big visual effects films. Just a little bit of light wrap goes a long way. You don't need to hit us over the head with it. So I think a lot of people will use that as a cheat, as a crutch, and they push it a little too far. So if we back this camera up a little bit, so here we have, this is our set here, and this is why we built the set, is to do classes like this. So it's fun to have it finally doing them. So we've got, you know, my little computer arrays here that I'm kind of managing the system. We've got all of this here. This little monitor over here just tells me what's actually going out to the stream, so I know what's going on. I got a couple confidence monitors that are kind of spread out. But then behind us, and you guys can go ahead and either turn this camera, or yeah, there's the above camera. There's our crew. Everyone wave. There we go. So there's a whole crew there that's managing audio and editing and video and the live stream and everything else. And so the reason that we don't just jump up and do these every single time is that, you know, it takes a little bit of gear, takes a little planning. So anyway, we definitely plan to do a lot more of these, and this is the first time. If you like it, then let me know. You can tell me on Twitter, or you can post it here or whatever. But if you like this format, let us know. And we're obviously almost all of this stuff is going to wrap around our partners in Rwanda. So really what we're looking at is providing these are the African training program, but we're just letting people occasionally, while we do these a lot more often than what we're going to stream, every once in a while we want to let the rest of the world jump in and be part of the classes as well. So anyway, so that's how all that works. I think he said, we got a couple more questions that I'm going to jump through really quickly. Julian said, for connecting scopes and tools like Pixel Conduit to your Mac, do you want to use Ultra Studio Mini, the Ultra Studio Mini recorder, or Ultra Studio Mini? That's what we use, or an IOXT. Those are the two that we use, and they work great. And then the next what would a super low budget start kit like schools be? Pricing range, start gear. You can really go, the super rebel way to do this would be to go to Walmart and get a fixture for 2 bulbs, get green bulbs from Kinaflow to light the background, use Lowell Ego Pros for the foreground, and whatever camera you're going to use, a mini recorder for your computer, and green a paint as you can find. And you could probably get away with that. You know, it's not going to look as good, but it's definitely, and that's not what you're going to want to show clients. But if you're doing your own stuff, I think you get away with that. Another one from Magic Mud in Kenya: is there ever a need to take any additional relight data so as to help match CG backdrops to the subject for HDR? So when we can, we almost always shoot HDR panoramas of anything that we're doing live action. So that's a pretty common thing to do to, you know, gather whatever lighting was going on. So if we're doing a visual effects shot and we really want to match it, we are definitely going to go in and shoot a panorama, typically with a Nodal Ninja and an 8mm to grab all that lighting data. So we at least have it as reference, if not use it itself. So good, very good question. Boy, the questions are now rolling in here right when I thought I was going to finish up here. From Mickey in the Philippines: can you discuss tracking markers for green screen shots with camera movement? Not just 2D movements up and down, but also pushing in and out. We will talk about tracking in another class. We have done a lot of that, and we have some very specific techniques for that, but it would take me a whole nother hour to explain how all that stuff works. So stay tuned for that, though. We'll put that together. Another one from Michael Jones in New York. So no question, this was great. Thanks, Alex. Thank you. I'm really glad that you guys are enjoying this. And then TJ Worrell says, thank you, Alex, and the whole Pixel Core crew. This is an excellent class. Really like the question tools. So great. Everything seems to be working fairly well. And then finally, this is from Dan Shepard in Kentucky. He said, do you ever gel the backlight magenta, which is something that a lot of people have done in the past. We don't do it because the green screen or the spill removal that we use is very effective, and so we haven't found the need to do that. So so not yet. So anyway, so that's the we don't do that. We haven't done it for maybe a decade. But again, because we have really good tools to do that, and a lot of the tools that are available in Final Cut and After Effects and so on and so forth are very good at this point. So anyway, so thank you very much. Hey, as always, to the guys at ADMA, thank you so much for putting together a great setup. It gets better every single time. So you guys are definitely putting together a great class on your end. So so thank you very much for. I know it's a lot of work over there. I know it's not just a quick setup. So so anyway, and hopefully I will see you next week. That's the plan at the moment. So if everything goes through and I get my ticket, then I'll be down there next week, and we'll all be doing another live stream together.
Excellent. Awesome.
All right. All right. Thanks, guys. We will. We'll see you soon. All right. See you later.